I was 8 months pregnant when my millionaire husband abandoned me at a remote gas station with nothing but $500 and a cruel goodbye. One minute, we were on a road trip to his parents' lake house. The next, I was watching his luxury car disappear down the highway while my phone buzzed with a text. I'm with Vanessa now. She's not making me deal with crying babies and stretch marks. The contractions started almost immediately. Not labor, just stress. But enough to bring Daniel into my life, the local doctor who took me in when I had nowhere else to go. Ryan had already frozen our accounts, locked me out of our penthouse, and told everyone I was the one who left him. I never expected the security footage from that gas station to go viral. I never planned for the world to witness my humiliation and Ryan's cruelty. But as his business empire crumbled under public outrage, something unexpected happened. I found my strength. My sketches of baby clothes became my salvation. What started as therapy turned into a thriving business. Now Ryan's back, broke and desperate, begging for another chance as my company grows beyond my wildest dreams. He wants shared custody of our daughter, the child he abandoned before she was even born. I have to decide what matters more, the revenge I could so easily take, or the beautiful new life I've built with a man who saw my value when I had nothing, a man who never saw me as a burden. Before we start the video, buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. Claire Sterling stared out the window of her husband's Tesla, watching the barren landscape blur past. Her hands rested on her swollen belly, feeling the occasional kick from her unborn daughter. 8 months pregnant in the summer heat, the leather seat stuck uncomfortably to her skin despite the car's premium air conditioning. They'd been driving for 4 hours straight, and her back ached mercilessly. "Ryan, I really need to stop soon," she said, turning to look at her husband. Ryan Sterling kept his eyes fixed on the road, one hand on the steering wheel, the other tapping impatiently on his phone. At 36, he carried himself with the confidence of a self-made tech millionaire. His jawline remained tight, a sign Claire had learned meant annoyance. "We're already behind schedule," he replied coolly. "My parents are expecting us at the lake house by 6. "I know, but your daughter is sitting on my bladder, and I don't think either of us wants an accident in your precious car." Claire tried to keep her tone light, though fatigue made it difficult. Ryan sighed dramatically. "Fine. There's a gas station coming up in about 15 minutes. Will that work?" "It has to." Claire shifted in her seat, trying to find a comfortable position. She couldn't help but remember how different things had been just a year ago. They'd met at a charity gala where Claire had been working as an event coordinator. Ryan had charmed her with his intelligence and ambition, sweeping her into a whirlwind romance. Within 6 months, they were married in a lavish ceremony that made the society pages. She'd given up her budding career to become the perfect wife to a rising tech star, believing she was living a fairy tale. The pregnancy had been a surprise, but initially a happy one. Ryan had seemed excited, attending the first few doctor's appointments, even talking about baby names late into the night. But as her body changed and the reality of impending fatherhood set in, he became increasingly distant. Work calls interrupted dinners. Business trips grew more frequent. When he was home, his attention remained fixed on his phone or laptop. Claire glanced at Ryan now, noting the designer watch on his wrist, the perfect haircut, the expensive cologne she'd once found intoxicating. He was objectively handsome, but the warmth that had first attracted her seemed to have evaporated. His phone pinged with a notification, and he quickly turned it away from her view. Not quickly enough. Claire caught a glimpse of the name Vanessa and a message preview that made her stomach tighten. She'd seen that name before, increasingly over the past few months. Ryan's new marketing director, he'd explained. Just business. The tension between them had been building for weeks. Questions about late nights at the office were met with irritation. Concerns about his increasing emotional absence were dismissed as pregnancy hormones. Claire had started to feel like a stranger in her own marriage, but she'd been holding on to hope that the baby would bring them back together. "There it is," Ryan announced, pulling into a rundown gas station that stood alone on the empty highway. "Make it quick." Claire unbuckled her seatbelt with difficulty. "Can you fill up while I'm inside? And maybe grab some water? I'm really dehydrated." Ryan barely looked at her. "Just hurry up." Struggling out of the low sports car took effort in her condition. Claire's ankles were swollen, and her center of gravity was completely off. The midday sun beat down mercilessly as she waddled toward the small convenience store attached to the gas station. Inside, the air conditioning provided blessed relief. The teenager behind the counter barely looked up from his phone as Claire asked for the bathroom key. The restroom was basic but clean enough, and Claire took her time, relieving her bladder and splashing cold water on her face. She studied her reflection in the spotted mirror. Flushed cheeks, tired eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She barely recognized herself. When she finally emerged, shopping bag in hand with water and snacks, the parking spot where Ryan's Tesla had been was empty. Claire blinked, confused. Had he moved the car? She scanned the small parking lot, but there was no sign of the sleek black vehicle. Claire's heart began to race as she stumbled out into the parking lot, scanning in all directions. The gas station sat isolated on the highway, with nothing but desert stretching for miles. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she fumbled to answer it, relief washing over her. Ryan must be explaining some misunderstanding. "Ryan? Where are you?" Her voice trembled. "I can't do this anymore, Claire." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I've tried to make it work, but this isn't the life I want." Claire felt her knees weaken. "What are you talking about? Where are you? Come back right now." "I'm with Vanessa now. She's not making me deal with crying babies and stretch marks." The cruelty in his tone was unmistakable. "I've transferred $500 to your account. That should be enough to get you home." "Ryan, I'm 8 months pregnant with your child." Claire's voice rose to a shout, causing the teenage clerk to look up from his phone. "You can't just leave me at a gas station in the middle of nowhere." "The marriage is over, Claire. My lawyer will contact you about divorce proceedings." His voice hardened. "Don't try to contact my family. They already know what's happening." "Please," Claire begged, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't do this." "Goodbye, Claire." The call ended. Claire frantically tried to call back, but her call went straight to voicemail. She tried again and again, desperation mounting with each attempt. On the fourth try, she received an automated message. "This number has blocked your calls." A wave of nausea washed over her as the reality of her situation set in. She was alone, heavily pregnant, with no car, in a remote location, with only $500 to her name. Claire clutched her belly protectively as a sharp pain shot through her abdomen. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The teenage clerk had come outside looking uncomfortable and concerned. Claire couldn't answer. Another pain gripped her, stronger this time, causing her to double over. Her vision tunneled, the edges darkening. "Frank!" the teen yelled toward the garage. "Call Doc Scott! We got a pregnant lady out here who looks like she's gonna pass out." An older man in oil-stained overalls rushed over, helping Claire to a plastic chair outside the mini-mart. "Breathe, lady. Just breathe. What happened?" Between gasps and sobs, Claire explained her situation. The two men exchanged looks of disbelief. "Your husband just left you here? 8 months pregnant?" Frank, the apparent owner, shook his head in disgust. "Some people ain't fit to live among decent folk." "I think she's having contractions," the teen said, watching Claire wince in pain again. "I already called Doc Scott," Frank assured her. "He'll be here in 15 minutes. Best doctor in the county, even if he is a grumpy son of a gun." Claire nodded weakly, focusing on her breathing. Every few minutes, another contraction would grip her, sending panic coursing through her veins. It was too early. The baby wasn't ready. True to Frank's word, a dusty pickup truck pulled into the parking lot 13 minutes later. A tall man with rumpled dark hair and tired eyes climbed out, carrying a medical bag. "Where's the patient?" he asked briskly. Frank pointed to Claire, who was now pale and sweating. "Her jerk of a husband abandoned her here. She's in rough shape, Doc." Daniel Scott approached Claire, his expression softening slightly as he took in her condition. "I'm Doctor." "Scott, can you tell me your name and how far along you are?" "Claire Sterling. 8 months," she managed between breaths. The doctor efficiently checked her vitals, timing the contractions. His hands were gentle but confident, his manner professional. "You're experiencing stress-induced contractions," he finally said. "Not actual labor, thankfully, but you need to rest, stay hydrated, and monitor the situation." He looked around the gas station. "Is there someone I can call for you? Family? Friends?" Claire shook her head miserably. She'd moved across the country for Ryan, leaving behind her modest life and few friends. Her parents had died years ago, and she had no siblings. Ryan had become her whole world by design rather than circumstance, she now realized. "I don't have anyone," she whispered, the admission burning her throat. "He's blocked my number. I checked our joint bank account, and there's only the $500 he mentioned. I don't even have a way to get back to San Francisco." Dr. Scott ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, clearly conflicted. "There's no bus service out here until Tuesday." "I can let her stay in the back office tonight," Frank offered. "Got a cot there for when I work late." "Not in her condition," Dr. Scott said firmly. "She needs proper rest and monitoring." He sighed deeply, then made a decision. "I have a guest room. You can stay there until you figure out your next steps. I'm not comfortable leaving you alone right now." Claire stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "I'm a doctor," he replied simply, and apparently the only decent man for miles around. As they drove to Daniel's house, Claire's phone pinged with a social media notification. Despite herself, she looked. It was a post from Ryan already public, a selfie of him and a stunning blonde woman on what appeared to be a private jet. The caption read, "Starting my best life." The timestamp showed he had posted it just 20 minutes after abandoning her. Daniel Scott's house was modest but neat, a one-story home with a small porch and desert-adapted garden. He showed Claire to a sparse guest room containing a bed with clean sheets, a nightstand, and a small dresser. "Bathroom's across the hall," he said, his tone professional. "Kitchen's open if you get hungry. I'll check your vitals again in the morning." "Thank you," Claire whispered, still dazed from the day's events. "I'll try to figure something out tomorrow." Left alone, Claire sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to fully break down. Her entire life had collapsed in a single afternoon. She sobbed until her throat ached and her pregnancy-swollen face felt raw. When she finally composed herself enough to think clearly, she tried accessing their joint accounts on her phone. Denied. Ryan had already removed her access. The only account still working was her personal checking, now containing exactly $500 as promised. She called their building in San Francisco. The concierge, previously always friendly, informed her coldly that Mr. Sterling had left instructions that she was no longer authorized to enter the penthouse. When she insisted that she lived there and needed her belongings, he suggested she have her lawyer contact Mr. Sterling's legal team. "But my clothes, my personal items," Claire protested. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling. I'm just following instructions," the concierge replied before hanging up. Claire sat in stunned silence. Ryan had planned this thoroughly, executing his abandonment with calculated precision. He must have been preparing for weeks. A knock at the door startled her. Daniel stood there with a glass of water and prenatal vitamins. "You should take these and try to hydrate," he said. "I heard you crying. The stress isn't good for the baby." Claire nodded, accepting the glass and pills. "I've been locked out of my home, my bank accounts, everything." He was thorough. Daniel's expression remained neutral, but his jaw tightened slightly. That sounds potentially illegal. You might want to consult a lawyer. With what money? Claire laughed bitterly. The great Ryan Sterling has a team of corporate attorneys. I have $500 and no access to any credit cards. Daniel hesitated. I know a family lawyer in town. She might be willing to give you a consultation pro bono, given the circumstances. The next morning, after a restless night, Claire felt marginally more clear-headed. She showered and put on the same clothes from yesterday, having nothing else to wear. When she emerged, she found Daniel in his kitchen, making eggs. There's coffee if you want decaf, he offered. Regular's in the blue pot if you still allow yourself some caffeine. Thank you for all this, Claire said, taking a small amount of regular coffee. I've made some calls this morning. My friend Susan from before I met Ryan is wiring me some money for a bus ticket back to San Francisco. Daniel nodded, sliding a plate of eggs toward her. The lawyer I mentioned, Patricia Gonzalez, can see you at 11. Patricia's office was small but professional. The lawyer listened intently as Claire explained her situation, her expression growing increasingly concerned. What your husband did constitutes marital abandonment, which will work in your favor in divorce proceedings, Patricia explained. However, his actions regarding the finances and property are troubling. As his spouse, you're entitled to access your shared assets. He told me he's already contacted his lawyer about divorce, Claire said. Yet you've received no paperwork? When Claire shook her head, Patricia continued, That's not surprising. He's likely manipulating the situation to his advantage, building a narrative. What narrative? Patricia's expression darkened. I did some preliminary research after your call. There are several social media posts from Ryan and associates suggesting you abandoned him. He's claiming you've been unstable during pregnancy and ran off. Claire gasped. That's absurd. He left me. Unfortunately, it's your word against his, and he has resources and connections you currently don't. As they continued talking, Claire felt another contraction, then another. Patricia noticed her discomfort and called Daniel, who arrived quickly to take her to the small local hospital. The contractions were again stress-induced, but the doctor on call kept her overnight for observation. From her hospital bed, Claire watched as her phone filled with hostile messages from people she'd thought were friends, all believing Ryan's version of events. Most painful was the text from Ryan's mother. I always knew you weren't good enough for him. Don't ever contact us again. Daniel visited during his rounds, checking her chart and sitting briefly at her bedside. How are you holding up? Claire looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. Everyone believes him. I've been erased and replaced in less than 48 hours. Daniel's professional demeanor cracked slightly, showing genuine compassion. Not everyone believes him. Patricia doesn't. I don't. Why? You don't even know me. Daniel hesitated, then answered honestly. Because I've seen this before. Different circumstances, same pattern. A powerful man rewrites reality, and everyone just accepts his version. He stood to leave. Get some rest. We'll figure out next steps tomorrow. That night, as Claire drifted into an exhausted sleep, she placed her hands protectively over her belly, making a quiet promise to her unborn daughter. We'll be okay. Somehow, we'll be okay. The next morning, Claire was discharged from the hospital with instructions to avoid stress, a recommendation that seemed impossible given her circumstances. Daniel drove her back to his house in silence, the radio filling the awkward space between them. When they arrived, Frank from the gas station was waiting on the porch, shifting his weight nervously from foot to foot. Doc, Ms. Sterling, I got something you both need to see, he said as they approached. Inside Daniel's living room, Frank pulled out his phone. We got security cameras at the station. After what happened, I went through the footage. Thought it might help you somehow. He pressed play on a video. The footage clearly showed Claire entering the gas station. Moments later, Ryan's Tesla pulled away from the pump. The camera captured his face through the windshield, cold and determined as he abandoned his pregnant wife. There's more. Frank continued. "That kid who works for me, Tyler, he recognized your husband. Said he's some big shot tech guy. Tyler posted a clip of this on TikTok last night. It's already got 500,000 views." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. "He what?" Frank turned his phone around again, showing a social media page where the security footage had been posted with the caption, "Watch this millionaire tech bro abandon his 8 months pregnant wife at our gas station. At Ryan Sterling living his best life, where toxic abandoned is pregnant." The comment section was exploding with outrage. People were tagging news outlets. Others had linked to Ryan's best life post with Vanessa, creating side-by-side comparisons. "I didn't know Tyler was going to do this," Frank apologized. "But honestly, what your husband did was beyond awful. People should know what kind of man he is." Claire sank onto Daniel's couch, overwhelmed. Her phone began buzzing continuously with notifications as journalists found her social media accounts. Her private tragedy was becoming public spectacle. "I need to turn this off," she whispered, powering down her phone with shaking hands. Daniel sat beside her, his expression grim. "This changes things. The public exposure could put pressure on Ryan, but it also complicates your situation." By that afternoon, the story had exploded. Local news vans appeared outside Daniel's house. Patricia called to say that several major news outlets were requesting interviews with Claire. "You don't have to speak to anyone," she advised, "but strategically, one controlled interview might help counter the narrative Ryan was building." After careful consideration, Claire agreed to a single interview with a respected journalist from a national news program, conducted in Patricia's office with strict conditions about what could be asked. Claire wore one of Daniel's sister's maternity dresses that had been hastily delivered. She spoke quietly but clearly, describing the events without embellishment, explaining how Ryan had systematically cut her off from their shared resources and spread lies about her. "I'm not doing this for revenge," she told the journalist. "I just want the truth known so I can move forward and prepare for my child's arrival with dignity." The interview aired that evening. By midnight, the fallout was seismic. Ryan's company stock plummeted in after-hours trading. Business partners issued statements distancing themselves from him. Former employees came forward with stories of his ruthless behavior. Ryan finally broke his silence with a damage control post. "There are two sides to every story. I ask for privacy during this difficult time in my marriage." The public wasn't buying it. Justice for Claire was trending. Women's advocacy groups offered support, but most shocking to Claire was the email from Vanessa. "I had no idea you were pregnant or that he was still married. He told me you two were separated and the divorce was nearly finalized. I've left him. I'm sorry for any part I played in your pain." Daniel found Claire at his kitchen table at dawn, dark circles under her eyes, still reading the flood of messages on her newly recharged phone. "You need to rest," he said gently. "This stress isn't good for either of you." Claire looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "His entire company board has called for his resignation. His investor group is pulling out. Everything he built is crumbling, and I feel nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just emptiness." Daniel hesitated, then sat across from her. "Revenge doesn't heal wounds, it just creates new ones." "I never wanted revenge," Claire whispered. "I just wanted my life back. But that life was an illusion, wasn't it?" Daniel didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "Sometimes, when everything is stripped away, we discover who we really are. And sometimes, that person is stronger than we ever imagined." Claire placed her hands on her belly, feeling her daughter kick. "I need to focus on the future now. This baby is coming whether I'm ready or not." "You won't be alone," Daniel promised, the words escaping before he could consider their implications. He quickly added, "This whole town is behind you now." Claire managed a small, tired smile. "Thank you. For everything." Neither mentioned that her planned departure for San Francisco seemed increasingly unlikely as her due date approached. As the media frenzy gradually subsided, Claire found herself in a strange limbo, still living in Daniel's guest room, still pregnant, still unsure of her next steps. The $500 from Ryan remained untouched in her account, a constant reminder of his callousness. She'd received offers of financial help from strangers moved by her story, but Claire had declined them all, determined not to become a charity case. One evening, restless and unable to sleep, Claire found herself sitting at Daniel's kitchen table with a sketch pad she'd purchased from the local drugstore. Drawing had always calmed her, though she hadn't done it regularly since college. Before meeting Ryan, she dreamed of designing children's clothes, combining practicality with whimsy. Her pencil moved across the paper, sketching a onesie with clever closures to make diaper changes easier, then a dress with hidden nursing access. She added delicate embroidery designs that told little stories around the hemlines. "Those are beautiful," Daniel's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair mussed from sleep. Claire blushed, embarrassed to be caught. "Sorry if I woke you. I couldn't sleep." Daniel sat across from her, examining her sketches more closely. "You're talented. Are you a designer?" "I wanted to be once." Claire set down her pencil. "I was working on building a small portfolio when I met Ryan. Then life went in a different direction." "These are really good," Daniel said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Especially this one." He pointed to a baby cardigan with adjustable sleeves and playful animal-shaped buttons. Claire smiled for what felt like the first time in weeks. "That's my favorite too." The next morning, Daniel's sister Emily arrived unannounced. She owned a small boutique in town that specialized in local artisan goods. "Daniel showed me pictures of your designs," she explained, settling herself at the kitchen table. "I'd like to feature them in my shop." Claire was taken aback. "They're just sketches." "Sketches that could become products," Emily countered. "I know several local seamstresses who could make samples based on your designs. We'd split the profits fairly, of course." Claire hesitated. "I don't have money to invest in production." "Let me handle the upfront costs," Emily said. "Consider it an investment in your talent. The baby clothes market is booming and your designs have something special." That evening, as Claire dozed with Lily sleeping in the bassinet beside her bed, a commotion in the hallway jerked her awake. "You can't go in there," she heard a nurse insist firmly. "Do you know who I am?" A male voice responded arrogantly. "That's my wife and my child." Claire's blood ran cold. Ryan. The door burst open, and there he stood. His designer clothes looked rumpled, his normally perfect hair disheveled. The polished tech CEO image had slipped, revealing someone desperate and angry. "Claire," he said, his tone softening artificially when he saw her. "Baby, we need to talk." Claire pressed the call button repeatedly. "Get out, Ryan." He stepped closer, his eyes darting to the sleeping infant. "Is that her? Is that our daughter?" "My daughter," Claire corrected coldly. "You forfeited any right to call her yours when you abandoned us." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, a calculated gesture of contrition. "I made a terrible mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. The pressure at work, the pregnancy, it all got to me." "Save it for your PR team," Claire replied, her voice gaining strength. "I know exactly who you are now." Ryan's expression hardened. "You've ruined me, you know that. The company's tanking. Investors are pulling out. Vanessa left. All because of that stupid viral video." "You ruined yourself," Claire replied evenly. "I never asked for any of this publicity." Ryan stepped closer to the bassinet, reaching toward Lily. "She's my daughter, too. I have rights." Daniel appeared in the doorway, alerted by the nursing staff. "Step away from the baby, Mr. Sterling." Ryan whirled around. "Who the hell are you to tell me what to do?" "I'm Lily's doctor," Daniel stated calmly, "and right now you're disturbing my patients. Security is on their way." Ryan looked between Claire and Daniel, a nasty smirk forming. "I see how it is. How long after I left did it take you to move on, Claire? Or was this going on before?" "That's enough," Daniel said firmly. 2 security guards appeared behind him. "Mr. Sterling, you need to leave now." Ryan backed toward the door, pointing at Claire. "This isn't over. My lawyers will be in touch about custody arrangements." After he was escorted out, Claire broke down, sobbing while looking anxiously at Lily, who had slept through the entire confrontation. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry. We should have had security posted preemptively." Claire wiped her tears. "It's not your fault. I should have known he'd show up eventually." They sat in silence for a moment, watching Lily sleep peacefully, unaware of the storm surrounding her arrival. "He'll try to take her, won't he?" Claire finally asked, voicing her deepest fear. Daniel took her hand gently. "Patricia won't let that happen. Neither will I." Later that night, after Claire had finally fallen asleep, Daniel sat in a chair by the window, keeping watch. He held Lily carefully in his arms, the tiny newborn looking impossibly small against his chest. "I've delivered hundreds of babies," he whispered to her, "but none of them ever made me feel like this." He touched her tiny hand with his finger, and she gripped it reflexively in her sleep. "I'll keep you both safe, little one. I promise." Outside the room, Daniel didn't notice a nurse passing by, overhearing his whispered words. She smiled softly to herself, thinking how the terrible story that had begun at Frank's gas station might yet have a happy ending. 6 months passed in a blur of midnight feedings, design sketches, and growing independence. Claire and Lily still lived with Daniel, but the dynamics had shifted. Claire now insisted on paying rent, using the proceeds from her increasingly successful business. Second Chance Designs had gone from 3 prototype products in Emily's boutique to a full line of baby clothes sold in shops across 3 states. What had begun as sketches at Daniel's kitchen table had transformed into a viable small business, with Claire managing production, design, and collaborating with a small team of local seamstresses. The nursery that had once been Daniel's home office was now properly Lily's room, decorated with soft colors and filled with light. Claire had taken over the guest room permanently, transforming it with small touches that made it unmistakably hers. Each morning, Claire would wake early to feed Lily, then work on designs while the baby napped. Daniel would peek in before leaving for his clinic, often bringing coffee and sometimes holding Lily so Claire could shower or simply have a moment to herself. They had fallen into a comfortable routine that neither acknowledged might be temporary. Claire had long since abandoned her plans to return to San Francisco. This small town that had once been just a gas station stop on a highway had become home. One morning, as autumn painted the desert landscape with subtle golds and reds, Claire sat at the kitchen table reviewing order forms. That evening, as Claire dozed with Lily sleeping in the bassinet beside her bed, a commotion in the hallway jerked her awake. "You can't go in there," she heard a nurse insist firmly. "Do you know who I am?" A male voice responded arrogantly. "That's my wife and my child." Claire's blood ran cold. Ryan. The door burst open, and there he stood. His designer clothes looked rumpled, his normally perfect hair disheveled. The polished tech CEO image had slipped, revealing someone desperate and angry. "Claire," he said, his tone softening artificially when he saw her. "Baby, we need to talk." Claire pressed the call button repeatedly. "Get out, Ryan." He stepped closer, his eyes darting to the sleeping infant. "Is that her? Is that our daughter?" "My daughter," Claire corrected coldly. "You forfeited any right to call her yours when you abandoned us." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, a calculated gesture of contrition. "I made a terrible mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. The pressure at work, the pregnancy, it all got to me." "Save it for your PR team," Claire replied, her voice gaining strength. "I know exactly who you are now." Ryan's expression hardened. "You've ruined me, you know that. The company's tanking. Investors are pulling out. Vanessa left, all because of that stupid viral video." "You ruined yourself," Claire replied evenly. "I never asked for any of this publicity." Ryan stepped closer to the bassinet, reaching toward Lily. She's my daughter too. I have rights." Daniel appeared in the doorway, alerted by the nursing staff. "Step away from the baby, Mr. Sterling." Ryan whirled around. "Who the hell are you to tell me what to do?" "I'm Lily's doctor," Daniel stated calmly, "and right now you're disturbing my patients. Security is on their way." Ryan looked between Claire and Daniel, a nasty smirk forming. "I see how it is. How long after I left did it take you to move on, Claire? Or was this going on before?" "That's enough," Daniel said firmly. 2 security guards appeared behind him. "Mr. Sterling, you need to leave now." Ryan backed toward the door, pointing at Claire. "This isn't over. My lawyers will be in touch about custody arrangements." After he was escorted out, Claire broke down, sobbing while looking anxiously at Lily, who had slept through the entire confrontation. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry. We should have had security posted preemptively." Claire wiped her tears. "It's not your fault. I should have known he'd show up eventually." They sat in silence for a moment, watching Lily sleep peacefully, unaware of the storm surrounding her arrival. "He'll try to take her, won't he?" Claire finally asked, voicing her deepest fear. Daniel took her hand gently. "Patricia won't let that happen. Neither will I." Later that night, after Claire had finally fallen asleep, Daniel sat in a chair by the window, keeping watch. He held Lily carefully in his arms, the tiny newborn looking impossibly small against his chest. "I've delivered hundreds of babies," he whispered to her, "but none of them ever made me feel like this." He touched her tiny hand with his finger, and she gripped it reflexively in her sleep. "I'll keep you both safe, little one. I promise." Outside the room, Daniel didn't notice a nurse passing by, overhearing his whispered words. She smiled softly to herself, thinking how the terrible story that had begun at Frank's gas station might yet have a happy ending. 6 months passed in a blur of midnight feedings, design sketches, and growing independence. Claire and Lily still lived with Daniel, but the dynamics had shifted. Claire now insisted on paying rent, using the proceeds from her increasingly successful business. Second Chance Designs had gone from 3 prototype products in Emily's boutique to a full line of baby clothes sold in shops across 3 states. What had begun as sketches at Daniel's kitchen table had transformed into a viable small business, with Claire managing production, design, and collaborating with a small team of local seamstresses. The nursery that had once been Daniel's home office was now properly Lily's room, decorated with soft colors and filled with light. Claire had taken over the guest room permanently, transforming it with small touches that made it unmistakably hers. Each morning, Claire would wake early to feed Lily, then work on designs while the baby napped. Daniel would peek in before leaving for his clinic, often bringing coffee and sometimes holding Lily so Claire could shower or simply have a moment to herself. They had fallen into a comfortable routine that neither acknowledged might be temporary. Claire had long since abandoned her plans to return to San Francisco. This small town that had once been just a gas station stop on a highway had become home. One morning, as autumn painted the desert landscape with subtle golds and reds, Claire sat at the kitchen table reviewing order forms. Lily played contentedly in her bouncer nearby, occasionally cooing and babbling. "I think we need to talk about the future," Claire said when Daniel entered the kitchen. Daniel poured himself coffee, his expression carefully neutral. "What aspects of the future?" "Living arrangements, for one," Claire replied. "I can't keep imposing on you forever. Lily and I should find our own place soon." Daniel sat across from her, his coffee forgotten. "You're not imposing. I like having you both here." "I know, and we're grateful. But it's not just about convenience anymore." Claire took a deep breath. "The business is doing well enough that I can afford a small rental now, and I think I need to establish more independence for Lily's sake and mine." Daniel studied her face. "Is this about something else? Did I overstep somewhere?" Claire shook her head quickly. "No, not at all. You've been perfect. Too perfect, maybe." "Too perfect," Daniel repeated, confused. Before Claire could explain, her phone rang. Patricia's name flashed on the screen. "Claire, we have a situation," the lawyer said without preamble. "Ryan's legal team has filed for shared custody of Lily." Claire's heart sank. "On what grounds?" "He abandoned us. He's never even properly met her." "They're claiming temporary mental health issues at the time of abandonment, now resolved through therapy. They're presenting evidence of his stable lifestyle, financial resources, and claiming he's a changed man who deserves to know his daughter." "That's ridiculous," Claire protested. "He only showed interest after she was born and his reputation was in tatters." "I agree, but judges often favor giving both biological parents access unless there's clear evidence of danger to the child, and Ryan is very good at presenting himself well." After ending the call, Claire relayed the conversation to Daniel, her hands shaking. "He can't take her," she whispered, looking at Lily, who was happily gumming a soft toy. "He doesn't love her. He just wants to rebuild his image as a devoted father." Daniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Patricia won't let that happen, and neither will I." The custody petition was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Ryan executed a carefully orchestrated campaign to rehabilitate his public image. He gave interviews about his regrettable lapse in judgment during a mental health crisis, spoke about his commitment to therapy, and expressed his deep desire to be part of his daughter's life. He even made a calculated settlement offer through his lawyers, a substantial sum in exchange for Claire signing an NDA about the abandonment and making a public statement of forgiveness. "He's trying to buy my silence and Lily's childhood," Claire told Daniel angrily after reviewing the offer with Patricia, as if money could erase what he did. Daniel had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the legal battle, offering support but keeping his opinions largely to himself. Tonight, however, he seemed especially pensive. "What are you thinking?" Claire asked, settling beside him on the porch swing after putting Lily to bed. "I'm thinking you never answered my question from before," he replied, "about why you felt you needed to move out, about things being too perfect." Claire looked out at the darkening sky, gathering her thoughts. "I've been dependent on people before, Daniel. First my parents, then Ryan. I need to know I can stand on my own." "Is that all?" he pressed gently. Claire turned to face him. "Number? It's also because I'm afraid of what I'm feeling for you, and I'm terrified of misreading what you might feel for me. After Ryan, I don't trust my judgment anymore." Daniel was silent for a long moment. "I don't want to take advantage of your vulnerability," he finally said. "You've been through so much, and you're still finding your footing." "I know," Claire whispered. "That's why I thought some distance might be good for both of us." From inside the house came the sound of Lily's cries through the baby monitor. Claire stood, ending the conversation before it could reach any conclusion. "We should both get some sleep," she said. "The custody hearing is in 3 days." The courthouse was smaller than Claire had expected, a sandstone building with American flags flanking the entrance. Inside, the air conditioning hummed aggressively against the desert heat. Claire sat beside Patricia at the plaintiff's table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to stop their trembling. Daniel sat in the first row directly behind her, a solid, reassuring presence. Ryan entered with 2 attorneys in expensive suits, looking every inch the reformed, responsible businessman. His hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccably tailored. When he caught Claire's eye, he offered a practiced, regretful smile that made her stomach turn. The proceedings began with the judge reviewing the case files. Judge Marianne Hawkins was a stern-looking woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She examined both parties over the rim of those glasses, her expression revealing nothing. "Before we begin," Judge Hawkins said, "I want to be clear that this court's primary concern is the welfare of the child, not public relations, not corporate reputations, not viral videos, but what serves the best interests of baby Lily. Is that understood?" Both legal teams nodded. Ryan's lead attorney presented first, painting a picture of a successful man who had experienced a temporary breakdown under the pressures of business and impending fatherhood. He emphasized Ryan's completion of therapy, his stable home environment, and his financial ability to provide for Lily's every need. "My client made one terrible mistake," the attorney concluded. "He spent every day since then working to become worthy of his daughter. He's not asking for full custody, merely the chance to be part of her life, as is his right as her biological father." When it was Patricia's turn, she approached the matter differently. "Your Honor, this case isn't about one mistake," she began. "It's about a pattern of behavior that reveals Mr. Sterling's true character." She methodically presented evidence of Ryan's calculated abandonment: the frozen bank accounts, the blocked phone number, the instructions to their building's security, all executed before he'd even left Claire at the gas station. This wasn't a mental health crisis, Patricia argued. This was a carefully planned desertion of a heavily pregnant woman who depended on him. Mr. Sterling's subsequent actions were driven not by remorse, but by the public relations disaster that followed when his actions were exposed. The judge asked pointed questions of both sides, particularly focusing on Ryan's timing in seeking custody only after the public backlash began. "Your Honor," Ryan's attorney countered, "my client was ashamed and uncertain how to approach Ms. Sterling after his actions. The media attention complicated an already difficult situation." At that moment, Lily began fussing in the courthouse childcare room. The sound came through on the baby monitor Claire had left with the court assistant. The judge called a 15-minute recess to allow Claire to attend to her daughter. In the small conference room, Claire held Lily close, breathing in her baby scent for courage. Daniel knocked gently and entered with a bottle of water. "You're doing great," he assured her. "Patricia is making strong points." Claire nodded, bouncing Lily gently. "He looks so polished, so convincing. He always does." "The judge seems sharp," Daniel observed. "She's asking the right questions." When court resumed, Judge Hawkins had additional questions for both parties. She asked Ryan directly about his current living situation, his work schedule, and his plans for childcare. His answers were rehearsed but comprehensive, outlining a nanny, a nursery, and flexible work hours. Then she turned to Claire. "Ms. Sterling, your business is growing rapidly based on the financial statements submitted. How do you balance work and childcare currently?" Claire straightened in her chair. "I work primarily from home while Lily naps, and in the evenings, Dr. Scott has been generous with his space, allowing me to set up a small office area. The local seamstresses I employ are also mothers who understand the balance. When I need uninterrupted time, I have a network of trusted babysitters, including Dr. Scott's sister, Emily." "And your plans for the future?" the judge pressed. "I'm looking at renting a small house in town with space for both a nursery and a home office. My business model is specifically designed to allow me to be present for Lily while still supporting us financially." The judge nodded, making notes. "Mr. Sterling has offered a significant financial settlement in exchange for a public statement of reconciliation and shared custody. What are your thoughts on this offer?" Claire took a deep breath. "I don't want his money, Your Honor. I've built something of my own now. What I want is to protect my daughter from being used as a prop in her father's image rehabilitation. He abandoned us when we were inconvenient. Now he wants us back because we're useful to his narrative." Ryan's attorney objected, but the judge waved him off. "One final question, Ms. Sterling. If the court were to grant Mr. Sterling some form of visitation rights, what arrangement would you consider acceptable?" Claire glanced at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. "I would accept supervised visitation in a neutral location," Claire said carefully. "I don't want to deny Lily a chance to know her father if he's genuinely changed, but I need to see evidence of that change over time, not just when it's convenient or beneficial for him." The judge nodded, looking between the two parties. "I'll review the evidence and issue my ruling tomorrow morning. Court is adjourned." Claire barely slept that night, alternating between checking on Lily and staring at the ceiling of Daniel's guest room. By dawn, she'd made a decision. She dressed carefully in a simple navy dress she'd purchased with her first profits from Second Chance Designs, brushed her hair until it shone, and tucked the receipt for Ryan's $500 transfer into her purse. At breakfast, Daniel looked almost as tired as she felt. "Whatever happens today," he said, pouring coffee with slightly unsteady hands, "we'll handle it together." The word "together" lingered between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Thank you," Claire replied, touching his hand briefly, "for everything." The courtroom was more crowded than the previous day. Word had spread about the case, drawing curious locals and even a few reporters. Ryan arrived with the same legal team but a different demeanor, more subdued and serious. He nodded almost respectfully toward Claire, a practiced gesture she ignored. Judge Hawkins entered promptly at 9, her face giving away nothing as she settled behind the bench and arranged her papers. "After reviewing all evidence and testimony in this matter," she began, "I've reached my decision regarding custody and visitation rights for minor child Lily Sterling." Claire held her breath, feeling Patricia's hand steady on her arm. "This court finds that Mr. Sterling's abandonment of his heavily pregnant wife represents a serious lapse in judgment that cannot be easily dismissed as a temporary mental health episode, particularly given the calculated nature of the financial and logistical aspects of the abandonment." Ryan's attorney leaned forward, clearly preparing to object, but Ryan placed a restraining hand on his arm. "However," the judge continued, "this court also believes that when possible, children benefit from relationships with both parents, provided those relationships are healthy and stable." Claire's heart sank. The judge was going to grant him visitation. "Therefore, I am awarding full physical and legal custody to Ms. Claire Sterling, with Mr. Ryan Sterling granted supervised visitation rights once monthly for the first 6 months, to be reevaluated at that time based on his demonstrated commitment and behavior." Relief washed over Claire in a dizzying wave. She had won. Lily would be safe with her. "Additionally," Judge Hawkins continued, "I am declining to enforce any non-disclosure agreement or public statement of reconciliation as part of this custody arrangement. Such conditions have no bearing on the welfare of the child and appear motivated by concerns about public image rather than parental rights." The judge set down her papers and looked directly at Ryan. "Mr. Sterling, should you demonstrate consistent, genuine interest in your daughter's well-being over time, this court will consider expanding your visitation rights. But that will depend entirely on your actions, not your words or your resources." With that, she adjourned the court. Claire sat stunned for a moment, barely registering Patricia's congratulatory words or the supportive murmurs from those seated behind her. Ryan approached their table as people began filing out, his lawyers hovering anxiously nearby. "Claire," he said, his voice carefully modulated, "may I speak with you privately for a moment?" Patricia looked ready to object, but Claire nodded. "It's all right. We can talk by the water fountain." Once they were relatively alone, Ryan's polished facade cracked slightly. "You won. Are you happy now?" "This wasn't about winning," Claire replied evenly. "It was about protecting Lily." Ryan ran a hand through his perfect hair, a rare, genuine gesture. "I've lost everything because of that stupid video. The company, most of my fortune, my reputation. All I have left is my daughter." "No, Ryan. You lost everything because of what you did, not because it was recorded." Claire reached into her purse and pulled out the receipt. "Here, I'm returning your $500. This is all I ever needed from you." Ryan stared at the paper, genuinely taken aback. "What is this supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not the same woman you abandoned. I don't need your money or your approval anymore. I built something of my own, something real." Claire held his gaze steadily. "If you want to be part of Lily's life, you'll have to build something real, too. Not just your image or your wealth, but actual character and commitment. For a moment, something like respect flickered across Ryan's face. He took the receipt slowly. "The supervised visits," he said. "I'll be there, every scheduled time." "We'll see," Claire replied, neither accepting nor rejecting his claim. Daniel was waiting for her at the courthouse entrance, Lily in his arms. The baby reached for Claire as soon as she saw her mother babbling happily. Claire took her daughter, breathing in her sweet scent. "It's over," she told Daniel. "Full custody. He gets supervised visits once a month." Daniel's relief was palpable. That's the best outcome we could have hoped for. As they walked to the parking lot, Claire paused. "I meant what I said about finding my own place. I still think it's important for me to stand on my own." Daniel nodded slowly. "I understand, but Claire, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been avoiding saying." Claire waited, heart pounding. "I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "I have been for months, and it has nothing to do with vulnerability or timing or circumstances. It's just you, who you are, what you've become." Claire shifted Lily to her other hip, buying time as emotions welled up. "I've been afraid to trust my feelings," she admitted. "After Ryan, I questioned my judgment about everything, especially men." "I know," Daniel said. "That's why I've been patient. That's why I'll keep being patient if that's what you need." Claire reached for his hand. "What I need is to move forward, not in fear, but in hope. And what I feel for you is definitely hope." In the car on the way home, with Lily babbling happily in her car seat, Claire watched the desert landscape pass by, no longer seeing it as barren but beautiful in its resilience. Like her. Like the life she was building from what had once seemed like nothing. 1 year later, the bell above the door of Second Chance Designs jingled as Claire finished arranging a display of spring baby clothes. The small storefront on Main Street had once been a struggling bookshop, but Claire had transformed it into a bright, welcoming space, showcasing her expanding collection of children's clothes. "Just a moment," she called, straightening a tiny sundress with embroidered butterflies along the hem. When she turned, she found Daniel standing in the doorway, Lily perched on his shoulders. At 18 months, Lily was a bundle of energy with Claire's smile and a determined personality all her own. "We thought we'd surprise you for lunch," Daniel said as Lily squealed, "Mama!" and reached toward Claire. Claire took her daughter, covering her chubby cheeks with kisses. "Perfect timing. I just finished the new display." They walked to the small cafe across the street that had become their regular lunch spot. The owner, Maria, waved them to their usual table and brought Lily's favorite apple juice without being asked. "The ring looks beautiful on you," Maria commented, nodding toward the simple diamond on Claire's left hand. "Have you set a date yet?" "September," Claire replied, smiling at Daniel. "Small ceremony right here in town." After Maria left to prepare their usual orders, Daniel reached across the table and took Claire's hand. "How's the department store order coming along?" "Ahead of schedule, actually. The new seamstresses are working out wonderfully." Claire's business had grown to employ 8 local women, most of them mothers who appreciated the flexible working arrangements. "And Ryan's visit yesterday? You never told me how it went." Claire sighed, helping Lily with her juice. "Better than the early ones. He actually got down on the floor and played with her instead of just taking photos for social media." Ryan had surprised everyone by maintaining his monthly visits consistently. The first few had been awkward, with Ryan clearly uncomfortable around his daughter and more concerned with appearances than connection. But gradually, something had shifted. His last few visits had shown glimpses of genuine interest in Lily, as a person rather than a prop. "Patricia says he's filing for unsupervised visitation," Claire added. "After seeing him yesterday, I'm actually considering not fighting it." Daniel raised his eyebrows. "That's a big change." "He's different now," Claire acknowledged. "The therapy seems real, not just for show. and Lily deserves the chance to know her father if he's genuinely committed. Their conversation paused as Maria brought their lunch. Claire helped Lily with her small portions of pasta, smiling at her daughter's determined attempts at independence. "I have news too," Daniel said after a moment. "The medical center approved my proposal for the Mother's Health Initiative. We'll be offering free prenatal care for uninsured women starting next month." "Daniel, that's wonderful." Claire squeezed his hand. "I'm so proud of you." As they walked back to the shop after lunch, Claire's phone chimed with an email notification. She glanced at it, then stopped walking, her expression stunned. "Claire? What is it?" Daniel asked, concerned. "It's from Nolan's," she whispered, referring to the upscale department store chain. "They don't just want my current collection. They want to develop an exclusive second chance designs line for all their stores nationally." Daniel whooped, lifting Lily high in the air and spinning her around. "Your mama's going to be famous, little one." Claire laughed, but her eyes filled with tears. "I can't believe this is happening. 2 years ago, I had nothing, less than nothing." Daniel set Lily down and drew Claire into his arms. "You never had nothing. You always had your talent, your resilience, your heart. The world just needed time to see what I saw from the beginning." Back at the shop, while Lily napped in the small playpen Claire kept in the back room, she pulled out her sketchbook and began drawing new designs, inspiration flowing freely. The bell jingled again, and she looked up to see a very pregnant young woman hesitantly entering the store. "Can I help you?" Claire asked with a welcoming smile. "I hope so," the woman replied nervously. "My boyfriend left when he found out I was pregnant. I don't have much money, but someone told me you might understand, that maybe you could help me find something special for when the baby comes." Claire set down her pencil and came around the counter. "What's your name?" "Jessica." "Well, Jessica, you've come to the right place. Second chances are our specialty here." As she helped the young woman explore the shop, Claire caught sight of her reflection in the store window, Lily sleeping peacefully behind her, and Daniel walking back across the street bringing coffee. Her growing, rounded belly was just becoming visible under her dress, their second child already part of their expanding family, from abandoned and alone at a gas station to this full, meaningful life in just 2 years. Claire placed her hand over her belly, feeling the slight flutter of movement. The journey had been painful, but she wouldn't change where it had led her. Not for anything. The email from Nolan still displayed on her phone caught her eye again. She would call Emily later to celebrate, and even send Ryan a message about their daughter's latest milestone. The man who had once discarded her like she was nothing would know that she had built something remarkable from that painful moment. Not from bitterness or revenge, but from resilience and hope. From the certainty that sometimes what looks like an ending is actually the first page of a much better story. The view of the city was spectacular, but my attention was on the document in my hands, the final judgment in Tim and Shirley's case. Tim had been convicted of corporate espionage, fraud, and first-degree murder. Shirley had received a lesser sentence for her role as an accomplice. The scandal had initially rocked Songkork's stock price, but my leadership through the crisis had ultimately strengthened market confidence. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Richard entered with a small cake, topped with a single candle. "Happy birthday," he said simply. I smiled, realizing I'd been so focused on work I'd nearly forgotten my own 27th birthday. "Thank you," I said, setting aside the court documents. "For everything." Richard placed the cake on my desk and moved to stand beside me at the window. "Calvin would be proud of what you've accomplished. The digital transformation is ahead of schedule, employee satisfaction is at record levels, and the stock price has fully recovered." "It's still hard to believe sometimes," I admitted. "A year ago today, I was completely different, unaware of so much." Richard hesitated, then took my hand. Our relationship had developed slowly over the past months, both of us cautious after everything that had happened, but there was something undeniably real between us. something built on mutual respect and shared values rather than deception. "You've changed the company for the better," he said. "You've changed all of us." I thought about my journey, the betrayal, death, rebirth, revenge, and finally, renewal. The ability to hear Shirley's thoughts had faded after Tim and Shirley's arrest, as if its purpose had been fulfilled. But it had changed me permanently, making me more observant, more careful about trusting others. Yet here I was, allowing myself to trust again, to feel again. "Make a wish," Richard said, gesturing to the candle. I closed my eyes and blew out the flame. I didn't wish for anything specific. I had already received my second chance and made the most of it. Instead, I simply wished for wisdom to appreciate what I had now: justice for Calvin, stewardship of our family legacy, and the beginning of something genuine with Richard. As news arrived that Tim and Shirley's final appeal had been rejected, I felt a chapter closing. The revenge that had once consumed me was complete. Now I could focus on building something meaningful, both for Songcork and for myself. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges in business and in rebuilding my capacity for trust. But for the first time since my rebirth, I was looking forward rather than backward, planning a future defined by my own choices rather than reactions to betrayal. That, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.